Hi guys, welcome back aboard our 44-foot hurricane damaged DIY catamaran project boat. Let's start this week off with a quick little confession. In the last tramp ramp video, I told you that the top of the tramp ramp was done. I am but a filthy liar because the hatches weren't actually attached to the hinges yet. Fortunately, it's an easy fix and I've got a pretty neat solution. These are custom designed 3D printed little spacers that are printed in a filament that can best be described as the Superman of filaments for functional 3D prints. This stuff is called PPACF and it is kind of like printing with metal. It is freakishly stiff, it doesn't care about sunlight, UV damage, it doesn't care about humidity, and it's high temperature resistant up to something like 227 degrees Celsius. I have zero doubt that my little 3D printed spacers are going to stand the test of time, and they're going to look a lot neater than a bunch of washers in different sizes stacked on top of each other, which is what was there before. There's going to be a little bit more 3D printing stuff later in this video, but now that my conscience is yet again squeaky clean, let's get back to our regular scheduled programming. In 2019, our boat was sunk by Hurricane Dorian. During all that mayhem, another catamaran landed on top of our boat, crushing the starboard hull and a part of the cabin top. The previous owner of our boat, Brian, repaired the cabin top and the starboard hull. From what I've seen on the inside of the boat, he did a good job on the hull repair. Unfortunately, life threw Brian a curveball, and after he was done repairing the hull, and he even spent time fairing it and everything, he never got a chance to paint the repaired area. And that's a problem, because Brian used epoxy for these repairs, which is a great choice for a repair like this, but epoxy doesn't like sunlight, or more specifically, it doesn't like UV. If you leave a laminate that's made with epoxy out in the sunlight, or even if it's epoxy where you've thickened it with some kind of filler, that stuff will start to degrade. There are a bunch of variables as to how quick the epoxy will start degrading, but here in the sweat lodge that is Florida, I'm pretty sure it'll start happening in the first couple of weeks. And this stuff has been sitting out for, I think, a couple of years. If you side up the side of the hull, you can see that there are some shiny patches. Those patches are exposed fiberglass fibers, and if you touch those, you can feel that they're kind of poking and like they're letting go of the laminate. That's where the epoxy has started to degrade and just crumbled away. The good news here is that Brian did manage to get fairing compound of most of the repaired areas. And that fairing compound, I'm pretty sure, has protected the laminate from any UV damage. Now, the fairing compound is probably still going to be degraded, and I'll have to sand off some of that and re-fair, which is still a big job, but at least it's not redoing all of the work that Brian has already done. Besides the big patch here on the starboard hull, there's also a smaller area down here on the starboard keel and a couple of patches over on the port hull. And just to be absolutely clear, I'm in no way bad-mouthing or blaming Brian for this. I knew about these repairs going into the project, and besides, you know, life just happens, and I'm sure if Brian had gotten the chance to, he would have gotten paint on those repairs. The outside skin on the hulls above the waterline is 2 layers of 22-ounce triaxial and a single layer of 1 ounce. I only have a tiny little piece of the 22-ounce triaxial, but it should be enough to let us get started to see what we're in for. Ooh, yeah, this was supposed to be like a quick little montage of doing vacuum bagging on this little area here, making a nice little repair of that UV damaged laminate. That's not going to be what this is. If you look at this area, and also if you look at this area and over here, you can see some shiny spots. That's never what you want to see inside of your laminate. And I've consulted with a guy that's smarter than me that knows the design of this boat really well. And he said that for this large of a repair in this area on the outside of the hull, we definitely don't want that. As you can see here, I've ground down through the layers of the fiberglass that makes up the laminate. There's a layer here, here, and here. The shiny spots up here and here are embedded inside of the laminate. It's areas where the laminate wasn't thoroughly consolidated, and that's really bad news because that significantly weakens the strength of the laminate. Welcome to a new segment, Mad's Stock Tips. If you guys want to make a lot of money, you should sell everything you've got and put all the money into some kind of company that manufactures 36 grit discs for angle grinders, because yeah, that's going to be a good amount of grinding. There is, of course, the possibility that I've just found one little bad area. The problem is, to figure that out, well, there's only really one option, and that is to start grinding. Before I eagerly start grinding away, I want to make sure that I have a supplier somewhere around here where I can get enough of this 22-ounce triax to actually finish the repair. I don't want to end up in a situation where I start the job and then can't finish it, and then we just end up with more UV damage. While I plunder the world's supply of 36 grit sanding discs and also figure out where to get this fiberglass for the repair, let's check in with other mads back aboard Athena for a quick 3D printing segment, and also the sponsor of this week's video, Bambulab. Almost 2 months ago, my brand new Bambulab X1 carbon 3D printer showed up at the Marina office. It only took about 30 minutes to get it out of the box and set up, so I was ready to start 3D printing. There was no tinkering or tweaking required. Ever since then, I have basically been 3D printing non-stop, and I have had 0 issues. I have not had a single print fail on the X1 Carbon yet. Over the last month, I have started using more fancy filaments, like for instance this TPU stuff here, which is super soft and flexible, or the PPA CF that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, which in contrast is super stiff and strong. I'm excited that there is such a wide variety of filaments to choose from, because I am mainly into 3D printing because you can print functional prints, like stuff you can actually use. Having said that, here on my table I do have a couple of examples of purely decorative prints, like these 2 light boxes here. I don't know if you guys recognize this guy. The 2 light boxes are also great examples of multicolor prints. That's prints where you use more than one color, and Bambulabs AMS makes that super simple. You can load in up to 4 different colors, and then you can use those 4 colors in your print. And you can even, if you have the room for it, add an additional AMS so that you will have 8 colors to choose from. They're super easy to make. It's essentially just a plastic box with a strip of LED lights in there, and then you have this cool thing. The light boxes are my own design, and I was just playing around a little bit, and I think they turned out fairly well. But yeah, I'll upload those to MakerWorld, so if you guys want to print a version of those, you can do that from there. And in fact, I'll include links for all of the stuff here on the table down in the description. As a great example of a functional print, I found these adapter thingies here on MakerWorld that turns your regular old boring Irwin quick grip into a 90-degree quick grip. This is going to be super useful for when I need to build some boxes the next time, and because these are just 3D printed, this whole adapter was less than $1. While we're on the category of 3D printed tools, this is another example. This is a corner jig. It comes with a bunch of different inserts that you can use for getting the radius you want, or you can custom design your own insert so you get the perfect radius for your project. The box that I'm storing the jig in is also 3D printed, and somebody on MakerWorld designed this little custom insert for this box that perfectly fits the corner jig. About a month ago, I designed these fillet forming tools, which are great for making fillets on your boat, whether it be for structural purposes or for fairing purposes. Now, to go along with these, I have the custom radius sanders. This is a cross section of one of my sanding blocks, and it's printed in TPU, so it's nice and squishy and comfortable to hold onto. The radius on the sanding blocks perfectly match that of the fillet forming tool, so all you do is just wrap some sandpaper around them and get to work. 3D printing is also awesome for rapid prototyping, and this little guy is an example of that. This is a model I made for a new water pump bracket for our engine. I was able to get the 3D printed version on the engine to just make sure that the geometry is correct and everything works in the way I intended it to. And now I know for sure that the laser cut part that's going to show up in a few weeks will actually fit. That saves both time and money. The same goes for this alternator tensioning bracket doohickey. I made this model here based on the metal version. I then printed that just to make sure that everything works the way it's supposed to. This little round funky looking guy is a test doohickey for the crankshaft pulley on our engines, because in the not too distant future we're going to be adding high output alternators to them, but I want to do that without introducing any sideways load onto the crankshaft. To do that, we need to be able to know the bolt pattern and the internal radius on the pulley, and this was to verify that. There is something in it for everybody when it comes to 3D printing. There are people out there doing insanely cool and interesting stuff with 3D printing. Now, the examples I've shown you here, and especially my designs, are colored by the fact that I'm kind of a boring engineering type kind of guy. But for me, 3D printing has been a great stepping stone to learning CAD also, because once you learn CAD and once you can 3D print your designs, well, then the sky's the limit. If you want to learn more about 3D printing, or perhaps you're specifically interested in the Bambulab X1 carbon I have in the forward cabin, then I highly recommend you check out Bambulab's website. They have a whole range of 3D printers. I'll include a link down in the description. That 22-ounce biax is proving slightly elusive. I've found one place way up in Washington, but shipping to Florida is going to be a little bit expensive. So yeah, I'm just weighing out my options. We could also maybe do it with some biax instead, but yeah, I just need to figure out what to do. But that's an evening activity. I don't want to waste this beautiful day on something like that. So now let's get started on the last bit of work on the tramp ramp. We need to be able to get chain from the anchors that are hanging here in the two anchor rollers all the way inside of the boat. There used to be just one anchor roller, hence the one hole in the hull there. Of course, now we have the two anchor rollers, so we'll need two tubes going into the boat. And wouldn't you know it, I've got those two fiberglass tubes right here. These are about 2.5-inch OD and 2.25 ID. My backup is this guy. He is about 3 inches on the OD and similar wall thickness. I hope I'll be able to get away with using the 2.5-inch. If I can get everything lined up correctly, this should be perfectly fine. But this is going to be a little bit of a puzzle. If I don't end up with the tube aligned correctly, then there's gonna be a bunch of chafing at either end. In the perfect world, we'll get the tube here lined up so that it's centered on the chain when the windlass is bringing up the anchor, for instance. But if the tube is slightly out of wonk, well, then we're gonna have a bunch of chafe. This is my plan. This is stolen from other PDQ and Antares catamarans I've seen. So we have the anchor out here, we have one of these chain stops here, and then the chain goes into the fiberglass tube. In the bottom of the tramp ramp, under this guy and also around the opening here, it might be good to have some kind of chafe protection. Perhaps something like some starboard. I've got some 1/2-inch and some 1/4-inch. Let's figure out this puzzle. To be completely honest, I've kind of been dreading the installation of the tubes a little bit, not because it's going to be hard work, but because it's going to be fiddly work. Let's just dive right in and see if we can figure it out. In the tramp ramp, the holes need to be centered on each of the two chain rollers. It is worth noting that the tramp ramp is tapered, so I did my best to use the two anchor rollers as a guide. I then marked the rough position on some masking tape. But who's to say those two anchor rollers weren't installed by Captain Dum-Dum and weren't lined up perfectly straight? As a bit of a sanity check, I decided to use some string going from the center of the anchor roller to the gypsy on the windlass. After a little bit of fiddling about, I was pretty sure I had the position spot on, and I drilled the first hole. Using the original hole in the hull, I was able to use my little string trick to verify the alignment of both holes. The original hole appears to be off by quite a bit, judging by the string and also by the chafing on the side of the hull. My new hole, on the other hand, appears to be perfectly positioned, or at least as perfect as my string test will allow it to get. This was incredibly lucky. I then repeated that process for the second hole in the tramp ramp, but to figure out the position of the second hole in the hull, I would need the first hole to be positioned correctly, all while of course getting assaulted by wasps. It was finally time to test fit the first tube, much to the entertainment of the frickin' wasps. Reason number 437, we should probably start moving the boat further north soon. Other than being assaulted by the wasps, I was very pleased with the anchoring setup. It's looking very promising. I mixed up a little bit of TotalBoat's high performance epoxy and thickened it with their silica thickener. After having removed about 1 centimeter of core material, I filled that gap with thickened epoxy to protect the core from moisture. I wetted out a little bit of fiberglass, and in what is probably going to be the silliest framed shot in sail life history, I got a new piece of core glassed in place. And just like that, after a long day of 99% head scratching and 1% drilling holes, it was finally time to call it quits. In case you're wondering why we need the tubes, it's if an anchor is not a good self-launcher. I've got a little drawing here. If an anchor sits in the bow roller and doesn't automatically slide out when the chain goes slack, then we end up in this annoying situation where the chain falls down between the hull and the tramp ramp. Hence the tubes here between the two. In the next couple of weeks, I'm planning on ordering a Mantis M2 anchor and some chain, and that looks like it's a really good self-launcher, but in case we ever, for whatever reason, end up with an anchor that doesn't want to self-launch, then it'll be nice to have the tubes in place. This morning I knocked down a couple of high spots on my repair there, and now I've got the tube in there just to make sure that everything still fits. Before I permanently affix the tube, I do want to get some fairing compound on the hull there. That's going to be way easier to do without the tube in the way. And for that, we will use some of TotalBoat's awesome Total Fair. If you're going to be fairing a large area or even just a small repair like the one I'm doing here, I would highly recommend you give Total Fair a try. It is the best fairing compound I have ever used. There are a few different reasons I say that. A product like Total Fair, where it is just a matter of mixing together two parts, is going to be way easier to use than something like epoxy where you add a fairing filler. The Total Fair will also be a much more consistent texture, so that's going to make it a lot easier to apply it. And by that I mean you're not going to have any grains of like unmixed fairing filler in it, and it's also just a way smoother consistency. Once you've tried it, it's hard to go back to the self-mixing type. Unfortunately, I am a little bit limited here in the fact that for applying this, all I have are stir sticks and my flexi sander. So this is not really going to be a good how-to, but yeah, even though this is a bit whack, we'll still get a good result. Well, that was a fun little experiment. I highly recommend getting the proper tools for fairing instead of just attempting to use stir sticks. But, you know, sometimes we gotta do what we gotta do. We'll let this sit till tomorrow, and then we can go ahead and sand and get the tubes in place. The next morning I returned and donned my dork helmet that I have a slightly troubled relationship with. But this is such a small area and it's not super visible, so I'll be able to get a perfectly fine result with my 6-inch sander. No need for Durablocks or longboarding. The reason I have a slightly complicated relationship with the dork helmet is because of the motor. It does this thing where it angrily beeps at me. I have tried taking the filter out, I have tried fully charging the battery. The only thing that seems to work is to leave the battery out for a few minutes and then trying again. With the dork helmet mysteriously back in action, I trimmed the tubes to length and cleaned up the ends. For primer and paint, I used the very last remnants of the Alexial paint Andy from Boatworks Today sent me last summer. While we're waiting for this paint to cure, I got started on a template for the anti-chafe. A bit of plywood and some hot glue is all that's needed. Now this is not name brand starboard material, but I believe it's made out of the same stuff. It should do a great job of standing up to the wear and tear from the chain. Thanks to the template, I got a nice snug fit, and I also made some little risers to raise the chain lugs up just a little bit. To make the starboard-ish material easier to remove, I chose to through bolt it to the tramp ramp. And just like that, we have a finished tramp ramp with one small asterisk. And that little asterisk is the fact that the backing plate we designed for the two chain stops last week and ordered from Send Cut Send isn't going to arrive until tomorrow. So yeah, that's not going to make it into this video, but at least It's looking pretty good up there. We've got the chafe protection in place. I've got the tubes here all primed and painted, and also that little repair up on the hull where that old hole was is all primed and painted. So we can go ahead and get the tubes here installed. For that, I'll use some of TotalBoat's high performance epoxy and also some of their TotalBoat seal. I'm not going to be glassing the tubes in place because they are a wear item, so it'd be nice to be able to remove them semi-easily. I've seen a couple of posts on the Antares 44 owners forum about the tubes wearing out, and I think there's also a single YouTube comment pointing it out, that when the chain runs through the fiberglass tubes, well, eventually they will just wear through and need to be replaced. And once that happens, I have this little plan of making a more gold-plated solution of a stainless steel tube that's lined with some PVC or something like that. But before I attempt something like that, I want to make sure that everything is lined up perfectly and working the way it's supposed to. So hence, we'll start with the fiberglass tubes. We shall promptly ignore any suggestive or lewd jokes about this bit of footage and instead just focus on the beauty that are the two tubes in place. To thicken the epoxy, I used a little bit of silica to keep it from sagging, but also added some milled fibers to give the concoction a little bit more strength. I mixed it to a non-sag consistency and put it into a small piping bag. Ta-da! Shameless plug for my fillet forming tools. Remember, the link is down in the description. With the thickened epoxy applied and smoothed out, the chain locker just needs a tiny repair on the port side and it'll be ready for paint. For the outside of the joint, I used a little bit of TotalBoat seal and then repeated the entire process for the tramp ramp side. This is freaking awesome, guys, and not only does the boat now look more complete when viewed from down below, which is of course very important, we also have a way of getting chain out of the chain locker. The reason I'm excited about this is because one of our big milestones for this summer is to have a working anchoring setup. And well, now the only unknown is whether or not the windlass works. If we duck down here, then we can see the back of the windlass. It is this black doohickey over here, and I'm not exactly filled with optimism because it's missing a bunch of nuts. So that's kind of indicating that somebody's been messing around with it, meaning it probably doesn't work. Next week, I need to get a hold of a starter battery anyways to test our two engines. And once we have that, well, we can try hooking this thing up and see if anything's spinning. If the windlass doesn't work, then that's not a big deal. They still make this exact model, so it should be an easy swap. So yeah, we're getting there. A friend of mine recently reminded me of the term Jesus nut, and he did that by referring to the crack here as the Jesus crack, which I thought was pretty funny because, yeah, if that repair fails, then yikes. The crack in the hull extends all the way up from the deck down to well below the waterline, so yeah, it cannot be overstated how important it is that this repair does not fail. It is already stressful enough crossing oceans in small boats, and I don't want to add the integrity of the hull to that list. And again, just so we're all on the same page here, I am not in any way upset with Brian. I knew about these repairs going into this project. I also knew that Brian didn't have any experience fiberglassing when he started this project. I was hoping this repair might be okay because of what I'd seen on the inside of the hull, because the inside part of this repair looks really good. He did a great job there. So yeah, we'll just have to double check the outside. There is, of course, the possibility that I have just bumped into one little bad area of the repair. Unfortunately, well, I don't really know of any other way to check the rest of it than to start grinding into it. But Ava and I have been talking a lot, and we're pretty much set on our idea of moving the boat this summer, provided we can figure out the engines and the steering. And while I wouldn't cross oceans with that repair, motoring up the ICW, I think it'll be perfectly fine. Once we're settled somewhere further north where we want to do the rest of the refit, well, then we could tent the boat and then we would have a little bit more control of the environment and the conditions, and that would definitely make it easier to do that repair in a proper fashion. Before we splash the boat, I would love to be able to apply copper coat to the hull, because once we start cruising again, we want copper coat on there. But to be able to apply copper coat, well, then we would definitely have to make sure that this repair here below the waterline, the repair on the keel here behind me, and the repair over on the port keel are up to snuff. I don't know, it's a bit of a tough one, I think, because it'd be nice to get the repairs done so we were done with them, but at the same time I want to make absolutely sure I do a good job, and I think I'll be able to do a better job once we're settled somewhere. But yeah, what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section. Next week we're going to be able to test our two Yanmar engines. I've been working on them while I've been waiting for fairing compound and paint to dry this week. They're all put together again. We just have to get a battery and a bit of diesel, and then we should be ready to test them. So yeah, fingers crossed for next week. And that is going to be it for this week's video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you! Not so quick. I was in the middle of editing this video and I realized that I forgot to mention two things. Thing number one. We're still waiting to hear back from JEFA regarding the new steering. Hopefully next week we'll get a quote so we can make a decision on that. And I've also noticed a bunch of comments asking what Ava's up to. Well, besides helping me with sail life behind the scenes, she's also got her own thing on social media. It's the Kindership. It's on Instagram and TikTok. So if you are a parent or a grandparent with a young kid that needs entertainment and education, then you should check out the Kindership. I'll include a link down in the description. And that is it. Now the video is done. So it'll be up on Patreon in a couple of hours and on YouTube on Sunday. So yeah, see you.